This is Bill Cook down at Ag City, a little piece of heaven down here at Junction T and 7. And we're in a little stretch about 40 miles from 49 Highway on down to the gateway to the Ozark, Clinton, Missouri. We got all these businesses along. We got farmers. We got all kinds of cool things going on. And today we are very privileged to have one of our key relationships, Trader PhD. And Dawson's with us today. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we think this summer is going to bring. And we're going to talk a little bit about, the exciting things in agriculture. And he's going to give us a little knowledge in ways that maybe you can make better decisions if you guys maybe think about hooking up with this company because they're really a good company. So, Dawson, nice to have you on today. And so, what's going on with Trader PhDs right now?
Yeah, thanks for having us back on, Bill. It's always a great time to get to sit down and speak with you guys. It's funny every time I hear your intro about, just how where you're around, the places you're around, and all I can say is that with us, we're just smack dab in the middle of the city, so not much to look at from the office in these parts. But yeah, nice little rural Iowa area, at least when you're kind of in the metro. But happy to be here just with the sun shining and, recording this a few days before 4th of July. So happy to get things going here with some of those festivities.
Well, and I think we're so blessed to live in a country that we do. And it seems like this 4th of July, there's a lot of excitement coming up. As we're not quite there yet, but we'll get there here pretty quick. But a lot of exciting things. And Dawson, I just think about all the people that got us here and kind of, I don't know if you know the names, like at the University of Missouri, Bruce Bullock was one of our really good guys we supported. And years ago, we just had a lot of good relationships on trying to get information from people like yourself that gather high quality information and get out to our farmers and our rural communities and business so they can make better decisions. So you guys play a really big role in our agriculture and our small businesses because you kind of tap into what is really going on around the world and how it affects us, here in our backyards in rural Missouri.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you mentioned, asking a little bit more about who we are is that for those that aren't familiar with who we are, Trader PhD is an ag market advisory service, again, based out of Des Moines, Iowa. Mostly have clients of grain and livestock producers, so farmers and ranchers, advising them on, what the prices could be doing here in the markets, as well as, trying to find those opportunities for marketing their grain and livestock. And, with the volatility that we see in today's markets, it's a little different than what we saw a few years ago, post COVID, but, things are constantly changing all the time with, the current war, Iran, or I guess the now ceasefire with Iran, whether a
Yeah.
war is still going on or not. It's kind of a tit for tat some days and trying to understand exactly what's going on, thousands of miles away and, how that's impacting our grain and
Yeah.
livestock prices here back home. So there's a lot going on with that. And so we're always trying to keep producers in the know of exactly what we think things could do, as well as just trying to have that adaptability with just the general news, general price action of what we think could happen and trying to manage that risk.
Well, and I think you do it so well because I've kind of been following you since your beginning and really like your messaging. And we have relationships along, I'd say 49 Highway. If you go up to Nebraska and on down into Arkansas, we have a strip that we do a lot of business in different businesses, mostly in soybeans, corn, and some of the things like that, non-GMOs, different things. But just a quick update on what we see is we've had some really erratic spring, lots of rain. You can watch these fields out here and the ones that flew on some stuff that, they're starting to green up and we're getting everything. We're in full tossle now on a really early corn. But now we got this, heat coming in. And so as we look out the back door, we kind of see a mixed bag. And so that's one of the things, you're going to share with us here in a few minutes on kind of how we can figure out whether we need to sell, buy, and beans are up and down one day and up 42 and down 76. And, it's just all over the place. So we really need your expertise to kind of help us make some good decisions as we go into this fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good starting point is to kind of look back of, earlier this spring when we got started with the planting season for, corn and soybeans, of course. Um, Looking at how things were is that, heading into the spring, we were pretty dry for many areas. But to your point, yeah, things got very wet pretty quickly. The Mid-South got plenty of super soakers throughout the Midwest, Eastern Corn Belt. Some of these places are seeing rain that they haven't necessarily seen on a consistent basis for many years. And so, we still found these windows to where the crop got planted at a pretty rapid rate, at a good pace, got that good crop establishment. And even after that happened, the rain didn't stop. And rain is good. We want rain to keep pushing this crop along, but um, for the most part, I think a lot of the market was not really seeing much of an issue with the rain side of things. We're not looking at heavy drought in certain areas for the corn and soybean areas, even spring wheat areas. And so things were looking pretty good. The market really saw that as a non-issue. But as we kind of start July off here, there's are some issues that we've been hearing from producers, not only in news reports from what other people are saying, but from our own producers that we've had individual conversations with. We just wrapped up a acreage survey that we released those results. Those producers were also sharing some things that they
Right.
got a lot of rain. And it started to cause some issues. We're seeing some nitrogen leaching. We're seeing some disease pressure. A lot of that starts up in the south, but as current jet stream patterns push things further north, we see a lot of the same disease pressure that some of those southern
Sure.
states are seeing
Sure.
too. And so disease is a little bit of a cautionary tale right now. I mean, for the producers that can afford it, you definitely want to be looking at maybe some of those fungicide applications to keep knocking that back. However, we're just seeing the risk of, that potentially be a problem this year as, like Southern
Sure.
rust last
Sure.
year was a problem.
Sure.
Southern rust began to migrate north quite a bit last year. And so we're looking at the potential of, yeah, having some of these disease pressures and, can the market kind of pick that up? Is it much of an issue to where, we need to price ration a little bit? That has yet to be seen. But there's just some things that we have in kind of not really in the rear view mirror yet of just making sure that there's plenty of crop season to go to see how things actually come out
Yeah.
because, we're still green, so we got to see what it comes out at
Yeah,
harvest.
that's a big 10-4. Now we're going to have a little short break, and then Dawson, we're going to come back and we're going to really pick things out. And so maybe you can kind of help us make some decisions or some things that this happens. Maybe you can even talk about the oil prices or anything that's going on. We don't know whether we're at war or we're at peace, and we don't know whether barrels of oil is this or So there's a lot of things going on in the marketplace that it's just hard for somebody out here in the middle of agriculture to figure it all out. So that's why we need people like yourself to kind of share some ideas with us. So if you don't mind, I'm going to have a short break and we'll be right back. This is Bill Cook with Ag City, and we're back with Dawson and Trader PhDs, and we're going to kind of really kind of narrow in here, Dawson, and you can kind of give us some steering a little bit on what you see is coming up for this fall and maybe even into the winter.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of just pick up where we left off, of course, is, what we're seeing here, at least for the short term, is, the potential of, you know, typically in this time frame from May through July, we have potentials of what we call a weather market. And so grain prices can kind of, pick up some volatility in this type of the area. So that's still something that we're having our eyes on. Does denitrification become an issue? Does disease pressure become an issue? And so a lot of what we're doing here is that we have actual price targets that we set out for producers to have an eye on. We track those for producers that if those trigger, we'll send out a message. But they can also put in those price targets with their local grain elevators too, just so that they stay on top of it. And if that price target triggers, they can get those orders in too. And so again, that becomes really important with the potential of a weather rally. And so, there's still reasons to be potentially optimistic,
Right.
especially as, are all the corn acres out there or all the corn supplies out there? That is yet to be seen. But for the short term, it seems like we've been pretty well supplied. So we're always looking for that next thing. And, we've had strong strong demand for a lot of our corn and wheat that we've seen this past year. And so for this fall, you bring up, we're trying to look to see, is that going to continue? Does our corn exports remain at a record? Does our ethanol production remain at a record? Does our exports continue to pick up and really keep going at some of these supplies?
So do you
Basically,
see?
can we stay competitive?
So what a lot of farmers do here that I work with, we have these SOPs and of course, we're always looking at last year, and last year, it wasn't a horrible year because we had such really good yields. Normally, in our part of the world, we're a little under a 200 bushel yield in this area that I work mostly in. Now we can get some over 200 bushel yields, but if you're farming 1,000 acres and you come up with 170 bushel average, you've done a really good job in our part of the world. Now, if you put a number to that, last year we didn't make a lot of money out here with the prices we had, better than the year before, but now we are looking at less yield, we believe, because what you just said earlier, like in the cornfields, you can tell where the early nitrogen was put on, and then if people came back over the air and put some more product on, those fields greened up. But otherwise, you got a lot of yellowing spots, and we're pretty well, I think, convinced that we won't have the crop that we did last year. So we're off probably more closer to maybe that 160 bushel, 165 bushel average. And then maybe under 200 bushel will catch a lot of the production area that we're dealing with. So where do you see that break even, or how do you see, are you looking at any of those numbers and see how these guys are going to, pay off their loans and get refinanced? We've seen a lot of farmers out here struggling to get refinanced late in the year, try to get their crops in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I don't dig into the individual books with farmers, but I know a lot of what we have seen is that, yeah, prices have not been what we've wanted them to be, ever since coming out of COVID. We're not getting still beans in the teens or
Right.
$7 corn. And
Right.
so, yeah, managing your budget, realizing what those input costs are becomes much more important. And as you probably know, we've seen so much margin pressure just due to higher input costs.
Oh, well, yes.
With the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, guys that didn't book their fertilizer last fall were definitely having to pay up for prices. And, we could see our typical seasonal easing in fertilizer just as the summer goes on, but there's no guarantee that we're going to see a correction in those prices to where, yeah, managing your budget becomes a lot more important. And, we're lucky that we got some sales done earlier this year to help manage some of that, because right now you're talking prices that for corn probably about 50 cents at least underneath what we were selling previously this year, just because of what the market has been doing. And so, yeah, managing both sides of that equation, the input costs and your
Sure.
price risk that you also have, becomes a lot more important. So yeah, to answer your question, budgets have definitely gotten tighter on both sides, on a price perspective and an input perspective.
Do you see any, you now, of course, a lot of what's going on here and this part of the world, a lot of it's based on nitrogen costs. I know earlier we were checking nitrogen prices, and these top dressers that were looking at nitrogen prices that didn't have them booked early, like you suggested, they were 3 times the price it was a year ago. Not just double, but 3 times. Now, this is late in the season, trying to get nitrogen in. So those things really make farmers, they make them have to figure out, do I try to get that yield, or can I afford to put on this extra dollars? And so that's what we've seen. I think most of that I think it's going to affect our yield because the bankers are the one that say, okay, yeah, I'll go spend another 35, $40 an acre, or well, maybe so, I think this is going to affect our yield a little bit this year in the areas that we see. I don't know whether you hear any of that or see any of that or what you think, or what do you see
Yeah,
on
I mean, yeah, there's definitely, I mean, there are producers out there that are probably going to skip a fertilizer application, that are probably going to skip a fungicide application. It probably happens every year that, margins become tighter. And, another thing to think about, Bill, is that not only are fertilizer prices higher this year compared to last year, but the cost of uh, how many bushels it takes to pay for a ton of fertilizer
Absolutely.
has just grown substantially.
That's
When you
that's right.
look at DAP and corn values together, when you look at urea and corn values together, it just is not something that we've seen for, a few decades. We're knocking at those highs that were last seen probably back in 2008 when prices had skyrocketed at the time and are against lower commodity prices too. And so affordability, not just on a pure price level, is also becoming an
So
issue.
would and I know this is crystal ball kind of stuff, and I know that this is probably hard to really narrow down. That's why, getting information from you on a weekly or on a monthly or on the time, your target prices are really important. And so I think your value to a farmer, sometimes we'll want to cut some of the things that make us the most money or give us the most information to make the best decisions, which is never the good decision to make. But in saying that, do you have any thoughts about at the end of this season what things look like going into 2027?
That's always a hard thing to predict because you'll say something and then we might start a trade war, we might start a real war.
Yeah,
And so things are always getting kind of interesting. Um, something to kind of think about too is that, you know, commodity prices, they go in cycles.
sure.
Um, the wheat market, we're starting to see signs where our domestic supplies and even global supplies might be starting to tighten up a little bit. Now, whether that, turns into higher prices or if demand kind of shifts for that, we'd like to be a little bit more positive on the wheat side, just on a global standpoint. And hopefully, the US can capture a little bit of share with that and, hopefully get some good returns for our prices. The same thing goes with corn. I mean, we've produced so much corn these past few years now. But you look at our demand, and our demand has just been outstanding.
Sure.
Brazil is producing more corn, of course, but they're consuming a lot more of it domestically. They're ramping up what they're using in for ethanol, and not only are they producing more ethanol, but they're consuming more ethanol. So we can stay competitive on a corn export standpoint as well as an ethanol export standpoint. And then also soybeans. I mean, the big elephant in the room continues to be Brazil. How much are they going to produce year after year? It's looking like they're going to produce more next year. But, is that rate of growth kind of slowing? That has yet to be seen. So, I mean, there's some things I think to think about that could be positive on the crop side. If you want to look at the livestock side of things, see robust demand for U.S. beef, not only on the domestic standpoint, but internationally, consumers still want beef, and so we might be exporting less, but the value of those exports is still holding in
Sure.
strong.
Yeah.
And then our pork exports are also holding in quite strong. There's a lot of demand internationally. We're still producing a lot of it. Those input costs are also rising for livestock producers too. So I mean, we talked heavily about crops, or I talked heavily about crops throughout this conversation, but the same thing applies for those producers as well, and making
Sure.
sure that we're paying attention to not only the price side of things that Trader PhD focuses a lot more on, but also what you can manage on the farm. Who also is in your corner, whether that be your agronomist, your veterinarian, everyone that you can bring into your corner to help you be successful.
Well, I'm going to ask a question out of left field here in closing, and you can dive into it however you want to, or you don't have to dive into it at all. But what you said makes a lot of sense, and we see traditional agriculture, and now all of a sudden we're seeing some other things going on out here in agriculture, more into your smaller producers, where they can grow other things other than corn and wheat and soybeans. So, I mean, we're doing a project with USD on trees. Of course, we've dabbled in the hemp industry a little bit to see what happens there. So there's a whole bunch of things, but we do see the buyer for our commodities or our products shifting a little bit to what they would call maybe a safer food source, or that's one that they trust better. So, these whole goods and all these stores that are popping up and the little producers, and we service a lot of small growers. I think Missouri is the second largest small farmer state in the United States, next to Texas. But so we do a lot with smaller growers, and we're seeing those growers look at other ways to make an income other than just the traditional ways that we've been used to. What do you hear anything, or do you see anything, or is that even on your radar?
I mean, I think it's on a lot of people's radar in the industry. I mean, personally, just from observation, I think COVID really heightened, or I guess sped up the need for producers to maybe start to look into not only the commoditization of everything, but also those value add things that they can do on the farm. Because, yeah, I mean, when you look at commodities in general, or just what grain and livestock producers have to deal with, they're a price taker, or a price taker in this type of industry. And so when you try to think about the value add stuff, you can almost have a little bit more control of the prices that you can set, whether that's if you're a cattle producer, are you holding back some steers to, take those to the locker and sell locker beef yourself. Trying to find those different things that can, earn a little bit more revenue for the farm because, yeah, I mean, price volatility has just always been a pain point for producers. And as input costs continue to rise, trying to find that value add thing to help a producer, keep the farm. That's ultimately our
Well,
goal, is that we want to keep that farm, we want to pass it down.
absolutely, absolutely. And Dawson, I appreciate those comments. And as we go forward, if you sense some things out there, I don't know if you get your thumb on the pulse of a lot of the rural communities or smaller agriculture. I think we're going to see, personally, I think we're going to see people trying to figure out ways to generate more income to stay on the farm, because farmers love to farm and they want to be on the farm and they want their kids on the farm, and they got to figure out how to make that work. So people like you are very important to us to make good decisions. I just want to thank you and your company for all the great things that I've watched you do, and I appreciate you being on this podcast today.
All right, thank you, Bill. Always a pleasure.
Well, you take care. God bless, and have a great 4th of July when it gets here.
You as well. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, buddy.